Hello, my name is Paul Plant. Today is May 27th, 2004. We're in Columbia, Tennessee today, where I'm honored to interview my good friend and legal giant, Jerry C. Colley. This interview is taking place as a part of the Legal History Project of the Fellows of the Tennessee Bar Foundation. Well, Jerry Colley, I'm in a position today that a lot of lawyers in our circuit would like to be in. I've got you on the hot seat and got a chance to ask you some questions. You're not under oath, but we're going to start out like we always do. Give us your full name, if you would, please.
Jerry Carruthers Colley.
Where are you from, Jerry?
I was born and raised in Centerville, Hickman County.
Now, your parents left you at an early age, is that correct?
Well, my father died when I was 10. My mother died when I was 11. They both had tuberculosis.
And the important person in your life then, I believe, was your grandmother Carruthers, is that right?
Yes, we called her grandmammy. That was my mother's mother. And she had raised 8 of her own children on a farm in Hickman County. And my grandpappy had died. And when my parents, when Mama died, I was 11, and my sister was 9 and my brother was 6. My grandmammy was 72, and she took us and raised us alone. I mean, in fact, we didn't have a bathroom till I was about 13 or 14. She did the cooking, washing, everything.
Hickman County was, it's rural today, but it was really rural.
It was really rural. Centerville's population was 900.
Mm. Now, your grandmammy, I know, instilled in you some very strong values about how to act socially and otherwise. She had some political ideas too, didn't you?
Well, my grandmammy was born during the Civil War. And of course, she came up through carpetbagger days, and they were all Republicans. And she was what you'd call a yellow dog Democrat. Well, she didn't think Republicans not only they weren't politically acceptable, they weren't socially acceptable. I got to be the paper boy for the Banner, Tennessee, and I was about 13 or 14. And there were a few admitted Republicans in Centerville. Now, we're talking about in the late 30s, early 40s. The 2 doctors and the bankers. And a few more voted, but Republican, very few. Grandmammy says to me, Jerry, I know you on Saturday you have to stop and get the money for the papers. Dr. Beasley was one of the big Republicans. He was a Republican leader. She said, now it's all right to go up on his front porch, but I don't want you going in his house. That's the way she felt.
I believe you had one member of your family who became rather prominent in the Republican Party out west.
Well, she had one of her sons was Howard Carruthers, and he went to Vanderbilt, graduated from Vanderbilt in 1914. He was the first person from Hickman County that went to Vanderbilt, and he went to World War I. Later went, after the war, went west and started practicing law. He graduated from law school in 1915 and became a Republican, unfortunately. And he wrote my grandmammy every month. He wrote her a letter, and he finally was nominated, was a Republican nominee for the United States Senate against Scoop Jackson, which was quite an honor, but you couldn't beat Scoop Jackson. And he wrote grandmammy a letter and told her about it, and this was before TV. He wrote her a letter and told her about it, and included some of the clippings in the Seattle paper. Grandmammy writes back, she showed me the letter, said, Howard, he had also criticized President Roosevelt in the letter, said, Howard, if you're going to criticize President Roosevelt, I'd just soon you're not right. And she told me and Sam and sister, said, don't tell anybody in Centerville that your Uncle Howard is running on a Republican ticket for the United States Senate.
You had some other interesting members of your family, as I recall, as a young lady who came to some prominence as an entertainer from Hickman County. Sarah Ophelia Colley, I believe her name was.
Ophelia Minnie Pearls, who everybody knows her by, but her father and my grandfather were brothers. My grandfather's John Colley, and her father's Tom Colley. They had a big lumber mill in Centerville. The Depression took them out of business, but Ophelia was one of the 5 daughters on that side of the family. And when my Aunt Fanny Tate, her mother, got real sick about 1939, Ophelia had been, she went to War at Belmont, but she was on the road producing plays for a company out of in Atlanta, and they sent her around to these different high schools back then, and she had lived with one of the families and stayed there 3 weeks. She came back home to take care of her mother who'd gotten real sick. Ophelia wasn't married at the time. We call her Sarah now, but back then we had called her Ophelia. And she got a job with the WPA. This is about 1940. The WPA had a recreation center in the basement of the high school. Made $65 a month. I'll make this short about Ophelia. The Middle Tennessee Bankers Association decided to have a meeting and a dinner in Centerville at the high school. Why, I don't know. And Mr. J.B. Walker, who was one of the bankers, asked Ophelia to put on a little program. So we did this minstrel thing, blackface, and I was the interlocutor. I was about 15 maybe. And at the intermission, she did this Minnie Pearl thing she had been working on. She had been living on one of these play tours she did and with a family in Sand Mountain, Alabama. And she was copying a girl in that family.
A real person?
A real person. And she did that, and when it was over, one of the bankers had something to do with WSM. He came around and said, I think you've got something that the Grand Ole Opry will like. She thought he was just being nice. A week later, he called her. He'd gotten her audition at National Life Insurance Company in Nashville. She went. The guy liked her. I've forgotten who he was. The next Saturday, he put her on the Opry, and she took off.
The rest, as they say, is history.
The rest is history.
So you were there at the beginning of a right prominent career.
Right.
Well, we talked a little bit the other day in preparation for this, and you made some comments about Minnie Pearl, Ophelia, Sarah, however she's known, maintaining her sameness over the years as far as her personality.
Well, she's one of the few famous people I've ever known that it never went to her head. It never bothered her. She was proud of her roots in Hickman County.
Grinder switch, I think she.
And that was a real switch in place for logging, moving logs on the railroad.
So that's real spots. It's not fictional.
No, it's a real place, but nobody lives there.
You have some other relatives that have been rather prominent in entertainment business. Dennis Stanfield?
Yeah, Dennis is my first cousin. He was born in Hickman County, went to Hickman County schools and later Lawrence County schools. And Dennis, in the late 70s, was president of 20th Century Fox. He was one of the producers of Star Wars.
How is it that you came?
He was also Grandmammy's grandson, too.
More acceptable than Howard. I suppose, yes. I think I remember his political affiliations. How'd you come to go to college in Nashville?
Well, I was in the Navy in 45 and 46. Got out of the Navy in 46. For some reason, I had always wanted to be a lawyer. I used to go to, when I was just 12, 13, 14, I'd go in the courthouse when trials were going on and watch them. And when I got out in August, and back then, you did not have to have a law degree an undergraduate degree to go to law school. You had to have 3 years of college. If you'd been in service, though, that counted as 1 year. So you only had 2 years of pre-law. I did that at Peabody and then applied for Vanderbilt Law School. Well, and at that time, it wasn't difficult to get in Vanderbilt Law School. If you had a good B average, you got in because they needed students. It was after the war. And I had the GI Bill, which paid my books and tuition, and $75 a month. I worked at the cafeteria to cover the rest. But my GI Bill ran out after my first year in law school. And I didn't have the money to pay the tuition. I could handle the books and I could handle my room and board, but tuition was $400 a semester at Vanderbilt Law School.
Good grief.
And after that first year when my GI Bill ran out, I went downstairs. The law school was in Kirkland Hall, where the big tower is, on the 3rd floor. The administrative law offices for Vanderbilt were down on the 1st floor. I went down to Mr. Buford. He was they called him the bursar or the treasurer. And I asked him if there were any scholarships or anything like that. I told him my problem. And he was a gruff old man. I mean, I was a little bit scared of him. And he said, what kind of grades you make? He kind of talked like Bill Keaton. That's the kind of voice he had. And I said, I made pretty good grades. Well, he said, I'll find out. And he picks up the phone. He calls upstairs to Ms. Magruder, who's the secretary, and she told him. And he hangs up the phone, and he says, can you sign a note? Well, I hardly knew what a note was. We hadn't had that course yet, you know. I said, I sure can. He says, you come in here in September, and I'm going to let you sign a note for $400. And you can sign a note, if you make good grades, then you can sign a note every semester till I get you out of here. That's the way I got through Vanderbilt.
Vanderbilt was already a 3-year program at that time.
Oh, yeah.
When you got out of Vanderbilt, did you have any idea what you wanted to do with yourself now that you got your law
Well,
degree?
I had a cousin who lived in Waverly, Tennessee, and she wanted me to come down there. The only lawyers in Waverly, I think Bill Peeler started about that time down there. And there were 2 other lawyers, and that's it. Well, I went down there and rented an office, put the telephone in, came back to Centerville. And that night, you know, fate has a funny way of playing out. A lady from Columbia, who I had married a man from Centerville, only person I knew in Columbia, called me and said, I know you've just graduated, what are you going to do? And I told her, and she said, well, I was eating lunch today with the secretary for a lawyer named Lon McFarland. And his partner has gone back to the Korean War. This is 1951. And he is covered up. He needs somebody bad, and he's a real good lawyer. She said, you ought to come up here and talk to him. Well, I didn't have a car, but there was a mail bus that ran from Centerville to Columbia. Left at 7 o'clock every morning. I caught the mail bus to Columbia. Mr. McFarland didn't even know I was coming. And walked in, I got there by 9 o'clock. He was president of the Middle Tennessee Bank, and his office was on the 2nd floor of the bank. And he came in, I introduced myself. We talked a little bit, and he said, give me some references. So I gave him the 2 bankers in Centerville and Dean Wade, John Wade at Vanderbilt. And we talked a little bit more, and he said, well, I'll tell you, said, I can check on those references later. Said, you just take this office over here and we'll see what we can work out. And that's the way I started with Mr. McFarland, and we stayed together for 25 years.
He was right much of a giant in Murray County at that time.
Oh, he
was in
was
the banking business. And
he was the top lawyer in this. I was very, very fortunate to go with him.
And over time, that law firm gained quite a bit of prominence in this
Oh,
part
yeah,
of the country.
we've had a lot of good lawyers in our firm. The first lawyer that came with us, Bill Kane, who's now on the Court of Appeals, he was with us for 2 or 3 years. And Ed Blank was with us a long time. In fact, Ed and I were together 17 years with Mr. McFarland and then with Billy Jack, who's another lawyer here. And Houston Parks, who is a lawyer for the bank now. And we've just had several real good, Bob Jones, who is the circuit judge here now, he started with us too. So we had some good young men.
Do you remember your first case?
I don't remember my first case. When I started, Mr. McFarland had State Farm, defending State Farm Insurance Company in several counties. And he would let me go with him at the trials. But after about a year, the first time, I'll never forget, the first time I tried a jury case by myself, I had worked on the trial, it was for State Farm, and Mr. McFarland, about a week before the trial date, said, well, Jerry, said, I'm not going to try this case. Said, you're going to try this case. Said, I'm not going with you. And it really kind of put me on the spot because I'd never had it. I had never done a jury trial by myself. That was the first one. But I guess what really got me started in the criminal law business was a woman named Irene Kelley. When I was I'd been practicing law about 3 years, and Irene was a madam. She had a house over on East 7th. Back then, the sheriff didn't care. I mean, that back then, this was in 54 or 5. That happened in a lot of towns. But Irene was really famous, and she had 4 or 5 girls that worked for her. She was charged with murder. She killed a woman named Gladys Haskins. They were arguing over a man, Irene's boyfriend. And Gladys, everybody in the county knew Irene. Gladys was down at Joe's Cafe, which is right down the street from where we are today. And she called she called Irene over to her house and said, I'm at Joe's. You come down here, I want to talk to you. So Irene took one of her girls and they went to Joe's Cafe. And she walks in and says, where's Gladys? Well, Gladys is back in the bathroom. So Irene and her girl, they go back to the bathroom. Irene pulls out a little pistol from her bra. Irene had, I don't see where I didn't know how there was room for the pistol there, but it was. Anyway, and she shot Gladys, who was sitting on the commode in the ladies' room. And of course, she was charged with first-degree murder. And she called me. Now, why, I do not know. I'd tried a few criminal cases, but not a murder case. And anyway, she called me, and there was a fellow in Columbia then named Ed Workman, who was a deputy sheriff. He later turned out to be a General Sessions judge, believe it or not. And Ed comes to me and says, look, I want to help you pick the jury. And I'll sit at the table with you. And I said, Ed, you can't do that. They won't let you sit at the table with me. Back then, the circuit courtroom here in the Murray County Courthouse had a big balcony on the back. It was a huge courtroom. Ed says, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. And Ed knew everybody in the county. He served papers on. He said, I'm going to get up in the corner of the balcony. And back then, we selected each juror individually. You know, now we put them all 12 in the box. But you put each juror in the witness chair and took them one at a time. He said, I'm going to sit up in the corner where you can turn your head and see me. If I touch cloth, don't take the juror. Or if I touch skin, he's okay. It's like the old baseball signals. We did that, picked that jury, tried that thing for about 5 days. Courtroom packed, balcony packed. This was TV hadn't really gotten going, and this was entertainment. And everybody, there was one lawyer's wife that was set up in the balcony with field glasses watching it. I'm telling you. Anyway, we ended up, got a not guilty verdict out of that. How, I do not know. Because I'd already told Irene, I said, Irene, the best we'll ever do with this is a manslaughter, voluntary or involuntary. Well, nobody could believe it, I mean, and that really got me the business from then on. I guess they thought if I could clear Irene, I could clear anybody, you know.
Do you remember what she paid you for that case?
I think it was $1,000.
You were the big winner, though, as it turned out, because your reputation as a criminal lawyer just kind of blossomed.
Oh, yeah, that got me a lot of good business and good cases, and cases that were notorious.
In fact, over the years, we were talking the other day, you told me you thought you may have tried as many as 50, 60 murder cases in your career.
Well, I've been practicing law now 52 years, and I'd say minimum of 60 to 70 murder cases I've tried.
That'd be substantially more than anybody else in this part of the country, wouldn't you think?
Oh, yeah.
Does one of them, other than Irene's, of course, does any one of them stick out in your...
Well, I tried, there's several cases that I remember real well. And there are a lot of, believe it or not, there are a lot of murder cases I don't remember the names of the parties unless somebody reminds me. But we tried, Bill Leach and I tried.
Now that's Bill Leach, who was the...
Bill Leach, who was the Attorney General.
Attorney General, State of Tennessee.
State of Tennessee. This is back in about 20 years ago. And Bill had just retired from or left the Attorney General's office. And there was a murder in Franklin, Williamson County. Joe Bennett and his father, they called him Greenie Bob Bennett, killed another Bennett who was a cousin, who had, the victim had burned their tobacco barn with about $30,000 worth of tobacco in it. I represented Joe, the son, and Bill represented Greenie Bob. And the facts were that Joe and his daddy were working at another barn, and this Bennett drove up, and the daddy, Greenie Bob, went down to the road where saw the victim's car, and the Bennett boy that had burned the barn started bragging about it. And Greenie Bob had these overalls, you know, that straps on, and down in the bib was a gun, and he pulled it out and shot the fellow right there. And then went and got Joe, and they drove the car down into Hickman County and disposed of the body. Greenie Bob said that the victim, the Bennett boy, had reached over on the passenger side and was grabbing for a gun. That was the defense. Well, we tried that and it was a celebrated case. Franklin courtroom was just packed. I mean, everybody. And Bill and I really worked that case now. Bill Leach was a great lawyer. And everybody believed or thought that they would be found guilty. And I'll never forget it. The jury went out, and the sheriff of Williamson County, Fleming Williams, was the sheriff then, and he came around to Bill and I while the jury was out and said, "Now look, when the jury comes back, if it's okay with you two, I'm going to take Greenie Bob and Joe out the side door on the way to the jail so we won't have any trouble." Well, they'd indicted them for first degree, second degree, arson, even indicted them for joyriding because they drove the car off down into Murray County. Well, the jury came back and started down the list and said of the counts and not guilty, not guilty all the way to the bottom. And it was really quite a win for us, hard to believe. And Bill walks over to Fleming Williams and says, "Now, which door do you want us to go out now?" Which was lots of fun. I mean, you know.
Oh, you were involved in some other cases in Murray County, particularly. That I remember back about 20 years ago, what came to be known as the Duck River killings.
Yeah, there was two young men were camping out on Duck River, and across they'd spent the night, and I think they were on some kind of drugs. This is about 20 years ago too. Bobby Holloway, whose office we're in now, Judge Holloway, was involved in that case. And a family was across the river having a picnic on the sandbar. And these two young men, they were 18 and 19, had a rifle. And they didn't know this family. And for some reason, they shot and killed two of them and wounded a third of that family, and were immediately caught. At the time, there was no public defenders, so defense attorneys had to be appointed. And Bobby Holloway and myself and a lawyer here named Bill Graham were appointed to defend them. Had to move the trial to Giles County, and we tried that for about a week. And of course, the DA was insisting on the death penalty. And I never will forget, they were found guilty, and we had the sentencing hearing on the death penalty. And I didn't know what we were going to do. You know, we had to have somebody that would speak up for these young men. And the mother of one of these boys went to one of the Churches of Christ here in Columbia. And I can't remember which one it was, but there was their minister was a man named Elmer Lusk. And the Church of Christ is rather conservative denomination that I'm not going to say supports the death penalty, but it would be surprising to see one of their ministers testifying at a hearing concerning the death penalty. But this man came, this Elmer Lusk. He came and testified for these boys because he knew them through the church. Didn't know them real well, but he knew them. And the jury found, gave him life instead of the death penalty. And I've always really, I'm a Methodist, but I've always really admired Brother Lusk. It was, took a lot of nerve, took a lot of guts for him to do that.
Very unpopular case.
Oh my, you just don't know.
You've been in some fairly celebrated cases. You were ancillarily, I suppose, involved in some of the Jimmy Hoffa.
Yeah, I was, this is back in the 60s. Judge Frank Gray was federal judge then, and Hoffa had been indicted and tried in Nashville, U.S. District Court. And he had hired two detectives from Huntington, West Virginia to what he called investigate the jury. Well, what they did, though, was, and I ended up representing these two detectives for jury tampering is where we're going on this. And what he did was, the two detectives, on the Sunday night before the trial started, they started calling the jurors at home.
That was their investigation of the jury, huh?
And asking them questions about what they thought of the unions and those type questions. Well, I've forgotten whether there was a hung jury or not in the Hoffa trial where he was defendant in Nashville, because later I think he was convicted in Chattanooga. But after that, these two guys got indicted for jury tampering. Well, the case was so well publicized in the Tennessean and Banner in Nashville, Judge Gray moved the trial to Columbia. That's when these fellows got me. And another lawyer named Walter Lever, who died not long ago. And the U.S. attorney was a fellow named Charlie Schaefer. I know his first last name Schaefer. And he had been going all over the country. He's from the U.S. Justice Department in Washington. He had been going all over the country trying every Hoffa case. He would be the prosecuting U.S. attorney. Hadn't lost a one. And a real good lawyer, big showman though, you know. And they were, one of the facts in the case was the name, one of the names that these two guys had used on the telephone talking to jurors was the name of the producer for the Lassie show on television. Remember Lassie, the dog? Well, they came on Sunday night between 6 and 6:30 on Channel 4. And on the credits was the name of this producer, which is a very unusual name. And I can't remember the name. But in making the calls, they had used that man's name as the caller. Well, Schaefer, the U.S. attorney, wanted to prove that on Sunday night between 6 and 6:30, Channel 4, the Lassie show came on and the credits would show this name. And I said, okay, we'll stipulate to that. He said, no, I want to bring the producer from Los Angeles to testify. And we can fly him in here and I can have him here in the morning. And Judge Gray, I don't know whether you remember Judge Gray or not, but
yes, I do.
He could be a very volatile fellow.
Yes, sir.
I loved him to death. He liked racehorses like I do, and we'd go to the track together. But boy, in court, anyway, he says, what do you mean you won't stipulate to that? He says, sure you're going to stipulate to that. Said he's agreeing to everything you want. Oh, but I want him here. I want the producer here for the jury to see. He was just trying to make a big show, see. You know what I mean? Well, he didn't stipulate it. And he brought that producer in, and he testified to what we'd agreed to. But I'll tell you one thing, he didn't get one single thing he wanted from Judge Gray in that trial from then on. I mean, he had made a huge mistake, and the jury found both of them not guilty. And later on, I was up in, I used to run steeplechase horses. And I had bought a horse trailer up in Virginia. And I used to fox hunt too, you know, where you ride horses and jump the fences and all that stuff. And bought that trailer. And I was going to bring it back, but we'd gone a day or two early, and my wife and I were driving out in the Virginia hunt country, beautiful. This has to be 64 or 5, somewhere back in there. Narrow country road. And here comes this fox hunt with the hounds and the riders, you know. Well, Schaefer was a fox hunter, too. He was in one of these hunts, like the Hillsborough hounds, you know. And we stopped to let them go by. And there, riding by, was Charlie Schaefer. This is about 2 years after the trial, and he stops. And he looks at me. He says, "You're Jerry Colley." And I said, yeah, and I said, well, what in the hell are you doing up here? Okay. But anyway, it was just a coincidence we ran into Schaefer.
Now, you said you loved to fox hunt. You're a lover of horses.
Yeah,
way back.
I was in the Navy, joined the Navy and got out of high school. I was 17. This was 1945, World War II still going on. Got boot camp at Millington down near Memphis. Later ended up at Anacostia Air Station in Washington, D.C. Never been to a horse race, you know, but for some reason I always liked it. And it was of course, Pimlico Racetrack is about at Baltimore, and the week of the Preakness, my buddy and I, a fellow named Charlie Gill, who I He and I had room together when I was in Vanderbilt, but we met in the Navy. We decided we wanted to go to the Preakness at Pimlico, that, you know, the second race of the Triple Crown. So we caught a bus, chartered, they had a bus ran back, and went over there, and luckily we didn't know how to read a racing form or anything about it, you know. But we ended up about $10 or $15 ahead. And man, I thought, you know, this is really a good thing, because I think we made $20 a month in the Navy, you know. And then that summer, the '46, I got out in August. There's a racetrack up in the Panhandle of West Virginia called Charlestown. And about 75 miles from Washington, I started hitchhiking up there every Saturday. If you had on a uniform, then they'd stop and pick you up. I mean, that's it. I'll tell you a real short story about that. One Saturday standing there, and a yellow cab came along just outside D.C. And he stopped. And I said, no, I can't pay. He said, well, where are you going? I said, I'm going to Charlestown Racetrack. He said, well, get in. His wife and another lady was in the car with him. She was the wife of a jockey riding at Charlestown. We got to Charlestown. He says, how much money you got? Well, I had about $20, I think. You got in free. The only thing you could lose was what you bet. He said, I told him $20. He said, well, I'll tell you. He said, there's a horse running in the third race that is going to win. This lady's husband's riding him, this wife of the jockey that was with him. He said, you meet me back here and the races are over, and I'll take you back to D.C. Well, sure enough, I put $5 on that horse. That's all I had. And he was 30 to 1. I got back $155, which is the most money I had ever put in my pocket in my life, ever. Well, I really thought the horse racing business was, you know, that was. So I met him back at the car, and the jockey was with him, the husband of the woman. So we stopped at a tavern about halfway between D.C. and Charlestown called the Blue Goose. I'll never forget it. Nice tavern, good food, big restaurant. Well, they had made a lot of money. They had done some betting. They started drinking. Of course, I didn't drink. I believe it or not, I was 18 years old and I'd never drunk a beer. I'll take that back. I had once or twice. But anyway, we stayed there till midnight. We go outside, start home, and he says, and I told him I was at Anacostia, which is inside D.C. He says, you got a driver's license? I said, yes, sir, I do. He said, you're going to have to drive this cab back to D.C. So I drove that yellow cab back to Washington. Drove up to the Anacostia air station, got out. I guess he got home, I don't know.
Well, your first experience with Pimlico has sort of stayed with you. What is your present address, Jerry?
1319 Pimlico Place, Columbia. I named the street.
You named the street?
Yeah. I like that. See, I used to have a trainer's license. A horse trainer's license for steeplechasers. I ran the Iroquois steeplechase. Had a real good horse I bought from a guy, trainer in New York. She had bowed a tendon. Horse bows a tendon. It's down near the ankle and it stretches out, and the only thing to help is turn them out for about a year. Maybe it'll heal back. So I bought this mare. She could run. She ran at Belmont and won. $1,200. Super mare. Turned out to be, and she could jump like a deer. And we won. I trained her myself out in the pasture in front of the house. I had about 120 acres by then, and had a black boy that worked for me. He should have been a jockey. He could ride a horse. I tried to ride her myself. She ran away with me and ended up 3 weeks in the hospital with a fractured vertebra. From then on, I let him ride her. I'd mapped and measured out a course. Mm-hmm. And of course, a lot of these folks that go to the Iroquois that send horses to the Iroquois steeplechase, you know, they're wealthy. They got big time trainers. Well, me and this black boy worked this horse for 3 months. And first race, we went to Lexington to their big race. We won at Lexington, Louisville, Oxmoor. She wins every race she goes in. Finally ends up at the Iroquois steeplechase in Nashville. and she wins there too.
She won the steeplechase, Iroquois.
You know, not the big race, the race before that.
What year was this?
72.
Wow. Was that the highlight of your ownership?
It was a highlight.
Racehorse and ownership?
Oh, yeah.
What was the horse's name?
Dream Cottage. She could run.
What happened to her? What'd you do with her?
I bred her to a real good stud in Lexington, and she died having the foal. The foal died too.
Now, you have your own silks.
Yeah,
Don't you?
you get that, you know.
Indeed.
Dark green with a red sash and red hoops on the sleeves.
In fact, I believe you have a flagpole in your yard that you fly those silks
Yep.
right prominently.
Yeah, I
don't you?
like the
Proudly?
horses.
Yes, sir. You still frequent the track when you get a chance?
Oh, yeah.
You told me one time that you used the horse racing to help you in offering spiritual guidance to some youngsters at the Methodist Church. Tell us about that.
Well, I've taught Sunday school at the Methodist Church nearly, for 30, 40 years. I used to have a high school class, high school boys. And, you know, high school boys don't like to come to Sunday school. They just, you know, they like to do other things. And I said, okay, tell you what we're going to do. It was in the summertime. I said, if you come 3 out of 4 Sundays in the end of August, Sam Kennedy, who's a good friend of mine, who was a lawyer here, Sam Kennedy and I will, this is before either one of us got married, we'll take you to the Ellis Park racetrack for the horse races on Saturday. So, anyway, that's what the reward was. Some of the parents didn't think that was a very good idea, but they came to Sunday school. Yeah, you better bet.
I bet they did. Enjoyed it too. You told me you had another trick where you sort of limit the discussion on the lesson so you'd have time.
Well,
to talk about
the way I taught that class when I had young people was first 15 minutes we talked about the lesson. The rest of the time you talk about anything you want to: football, basketball, girls, just you name it. And they, you know, that works.
Let's talk about your family a little bit, Jerry. Your wife. Tell us about your wife.
Well, I've been married 3 times. My first wife and I. My first wife was raised in Europe. Her father was a foreign correspondent for the Los Angeles Times, and she went to school in Europe, but came over here when she was 18 to go to college, and she lived with her uncle and aunt who lived here in Columbia, and we met and we got married after her first year, and we have 4 children. John is my oldest son, and he practices law with me, and my daughter, who's now 43, I think, I gotta lose. She's the oldest child. She works for Nature Conservancy. My other daughter is a lawyer for CNN in Atlanta. And I have my other second son, Drake, has a liquor store here in Columbia. Drake wouldn't study too much. And then Bitsy, my first wife, we got a divorce, and she went to New Mexico, where she is now. She taught school out there. And I married the second time.
Bitsy's full name was?
Drake. Her name was Errol Drake. And then I married in 74, I married Dorothy Hoover from Murfreesboro. And we had 1 child, Jerry Jr., who's now 28 and just got his master's from Middle Tennessee State. Great kid. And in 84, Dot died in her sleep with a massive, she had an aneurysm.
Remember that
well. Just not even sick, just died. And then I married in 86, I married Linda Fogg, who is just the best thing happened to me, really. She's something else. And she raised my youngest, little Jerry. Dot's son was 8 when she died. And he was 10 when I married Linda. And he treats her like she's his mother. So it's turned out great.
Well, I know that Drake does a little basketball officiating. You do something. You did
So
something.
yeah, I
over
did.
there.
I was football official and basketball official for high school and small colleges for 30 years, at least. And my son Drake he is a basketball official for high school and has been for several years. I really liked the football and the basketball.
Your career has, as we discussed, was heightened a great deal by that first big criminal case with Miss Irene, and you've already told us that you've done an awful lot of murder cases. What is it about criminal law that attracts you to it?
I hate to say this, you know. It's competitive. And, you know, you can compare it to a football game or a basketball game. You want to win, and I've always been, I think, a rather competitive person, and I just like to see. There's something about when you're facing a case where the odds are all against you, you know, that if you in some way can win the case. Now, that doesn't mean you always get a not guilty verdict, you know, in murder cases. And I've tried a lot more cases besides murder cases, you know, robberies and those types. But in murder cases, if you can get a conviction of one of the lesser charges, you know, you've won. And that's what makes you get that energy. I don't know how it works, but I do. And you've got to relate to the jury. See, unfortunately, there are not a lot of lawyers now that really relate to the jury and get on that level or their level. I don't mean it's a low level, but you know, a lot of lawyers they have a little superior attitude. Mr. John Hooker's the best lawyer I ever saw in my life.
You Mr. John Sr.
John Sr., John Jay's daddy. He could walk in a courtroom, and I don't care if it was in Hohenwald or Nashville or New York City. When he walked in, everything focused on Mr. Hooker from then on. And if he was in some rural town, he related to those jurors. If he was in Nashville or some big city, he adjusted to that. And he was always a gentleman. I can rank the lawyers that I've tried lawsuits with, and he's number one. And he had the same desire to win. But now he did it, you never saw him jumping on a witness that, I had a case with him. I was representing this lady whose husband was killed by the train hit him at the crossing. And Mr. Hooker, he and Tyree Harris and Harlan Dodson represented L&N, you know. Of course, and L&N was kind of their sacred cow. And we tried it in U.S. District Court, and I almost lost that case, and I had a good case because my widow, who was a neat-looking lady and really neat woman, and she was only in her 30s. Her husband was about 34 or 35 when he was killed. He treated her like she was the queen. I mean, you never saw anything like it. And that endeared him to the jury. And I got a verdict, but it wasn't what we should have. But I've always thought that if you try a lawsuit, it's not so much the facts, it all depends on your client. If you've got a client that's makes a good impression with the jury and they like him or her, I don't care what the facts are, that jury is going to try to help that person they like. Now sometimes, and that means like in a murder case, instead of maybe first degree, the guy gets manslaughter, you know. And on the flip side of that is, if the defendant in a civil case or the victim in a criminal case, they don't like the jury, then they're going to give that, in the civil case, just as little as they can, or maybe nothing. And if the victim they don't like, you know, one of the great defenses in a murder case is when you're really in bad shape. One is the insanity defense, which is almost impossible. And one is what one of our judges calls the sod defense, so some other dude done it. And the third defense is he needed killing. Now, I promise you, now you may be laughing at me.
No, sir, I agree with you. I think you're exactly right.
That's the best defense you can have. If you can show that the defendant was worthless, no good, and had done a lot of bad things, then I mean the victim was worthless and no good and done a lot of bad things, then you're going to walk every time.
Do you give your client advice on what to wear, how to dress, how to act, that sort of thing?
Well, I always tell him what to wear. I try to keep my client, if he's going to testify, and we're talking about criminal cases.
Right.
The key thing with that is don't lose your temper. Don't get mad. Now, the DA is going to jump on you. He's going to do his best to make you mad and get you upset and get you firing back at him. Now, you really need to make the witness understand that if he fires back, that if he starts asking questions, he's done. It's over. If you can keep him on that emotional level, you're okay. But, you know, the problem is with a lot of criminal defendants, they wouldn't be sitting there anyway if they had the right emotional level. I mean, you know, it's a problem. And that's one thing that, you know, defense lawyers get criticized for not putting their client on the stand. And most of the times when they don't testify, it's because the defense lawyer knows that this fellow will lose his composure, that he's going to blow up. And if he does that, then the ball game's over as far as the jury's concerned.
You were appointed to several cases early on, many cases early on. We've had the public defender system in place now for what, about 15, 20 years. Started out here in our circuit, I believe, as one of the pilot circuits. What do you think of the public defender system?
It's great. You know, back when I started practicing law, you didn't have the volume of cases that you do now, civil and criminal. I mean, it's just, and you have so many young defendants in court now. It's disturbing. Juveniles and the 18, 19, 20-year-olds, it's bad. And none of these, just a fraction can afford a lawyer. So if we didn't have the public defender, I don't know what would happen. Because back when we got appointed, there weren't that many cases out there coming up that needed, where the judge would have to appoint somebody. Now the volume is just something else. But you still get appointed on murder cases, and the judge has to appoint lawyers on some of these heavy murder cases. I got appointed on Pat Bondurant, which is a celebrated case, been 10 years ago. And Pat charged with murdering this man and dismembering his body and taking his body and burning it. And this was in Giles County, but we tried it up here because of the publicity. And Pat got convicted, only death penalty I've had, got the death penalty. Later reversed, but the jury gave it to him. He was charged with arson. He burned the fellow's house at the same time he killed him. And, or he's charged with that. And Pat's got a lot of wit about him. Very unusual fellow. Great big guy. He's been in the pen now for 20 years, I'd say. He was already in the pen on something else when we tried this case. But he was also charged with arson. Well, the way it works, if a jury finds the defendant guilty of first-degree murder and gives him the death penalty, you don't have to have the sentencing hearing because the jury's done the sentencing, correct? But he was also charged with arson. Well, arson carries maximum of 8 years, and we had to have a sentencing hearing because they found him guilty of arson. And Judge Hamilton was the judge, and we had the sentencing hearing about a month later. And Pat's sitting next to me at the table. And my argument is, look, Judge, give him the maximum 8 years. He's already got the death penalty, and run it concurrent, not consecutive, not on top of the death penalty. Just run it concurrent, side by side. Well, Judge Hamilton says, no, I'm going to give him 8 years, and I'm going to run it consecutive to the death penalty. And Pat punches me, and he says, now, Mr. Colley, what does that mean? I said, Pat, that means after, I knew he could take a joke. I said, Pat, that means after they electrocute you, you're going to have to serve 8 more years. And he says, well, I guess my body will just lie in state in the penitentiary for 8 years. Had a very good attitude about luckily later the Supreme Court reversed the death penalty. He's got life.
We're going to take a short break in a minute, but before we do, Ramsey Clark in the Super Lawyers talks about the first criminal defendant he ever represented him sending him a Christmas card every year from the pen. Do you have any communication with your former clients?
I've got one or two that send me a card every now and then. I really do. I've got one that, and I don't know why she does it. She killed her husband. He was watching TV. He was very abusive, and Giles County. And he was in the lazy boy watching TV, and one afternoon after he got home from work, and she came with a shotgun and shot him in the head, just like that, gone. She's almost ready to get out, but she was heavily abused, but I worked out a plea agreement for her. She sends, I don't know why she does this, she sends me a card on Father's Day every year. I got one this past Father's Day. Now, why that, I do not know. But it's nice she thinks of me.
Let's take a short break and we'll resume in a moment.
Okay.